Okay, so today we're going to talk about vacuum-operated secondaries on Aisan carburetors. So vacuum-operated is a little bit of a misnomer because it's not entirely vacuum-operated. So it's a combination of mechanical and vacuum-operated. So this happens to be a 1975 Toyota Land Cruiser carburetor, but most of them are similar. So what I mean by is a combination of mechanical and vacuum operated is the mechanical linkage here is partially responsible for opening the secondary. In fact, it has to open first before the vacuum secondary will kick in. So here what we've got is we've got our primary bore and we have the secondary. So this is what opens in response to vacuum. So we have to open the primary all the way first, and you'll notice here that the primary linkage is going to kick this secondary open slightly. Okay, so as we open the primary all the way, you kick open the vacuum secondary slightly. So this is actually an important setting in setting up the carburetor. The factory service manual gives you an angular deflection, so how many degrees it opens. But I took a look at this particular one, and this opening here is about 2 millimeters. So one of the adjustments you have is how far the mechanical linkage opens this secondary. So by adjusting or bending this little arm, you can increase the opening, so how much the actual mechanical linkage will open the secondary, and that will influence how much vacuum is actually sent to the vacuum actuator. So if you bend this up, it will actually increase the amount of opening. Now you also notice that when the primary is shut, it's not possible to open the secondary. It's actually locked in place. So it has to be open all the way before it will open. And then the vacuums, once it's open all the way, then the vacuum will pull on this actuator here and actually open the secondary all the way open by the action of the vacuum operator. Okay? Now one of the things that comes up a lot is that people wonder, how do I know that my vacuum secondary is working? So this is a vacuum actuator, and when it opens it, it draws this rod in, and you can do the paperclip test. So to do that, you put the paperclip on this rod, this flat rod, and you put it so it's all the way touching the canister here. And then what happens is you take your truck and you drive it around your neighborhood, and you will try to go uphill in fourth gear and put the maximum load on the engine to cause the vacuum secondary to open. So when that happens, then the secondary opens all the way, and what you'll see happen is that the rod will be drawn into the vacuum canister as the secondary opens, and then when you get done driving, then it will move the paper clip down the rod. Now the actual distance that it moves it is about 12 to 13 millimeters. So depending on how far the paperclip moves, you can tell whether or not your secondary opened all the way during that test. So 12 millimeters corresponds to full opening of the secondary. All right. Now if you do the paperclip test and you find out that it isn't working, the next thing to do would be to test the vacuum actuator. So this is you can actually remove this from the carburetor bowl. It bolts on right here. So you take out these two screws, remove this part, and then you can check the operation of this. So what you have here is you have a little tiny hole. This is the vacuum port that will pull this diaphragm in against this spring pressure. So the way to test it is you pull a vacuum on that, and by that I mean you suck on it until it's all the way in, then put your hand over the hole, and you see how long this rod will be retained without coming out. And as long as it holds this vacuum for about half a minute or so, and then you let your finger over the hole, and you can see there it goes out about a half an inch again. So that test tells you that the vacuum diaphragm is good. Okay? So the last thing is, how does this thing work? It's a little bit mysterious, but you have a vacuum port here in the carb bowl that corresponds to this port here that moves the diaphragm in and out. Okay? So where does this vacuum come from? So you can find out the connectivity of this hole by spraying carburetor cleaner through it. And when you do that, you'll find out that the vacuum comes out in this hole. So this hole here is connected to this one through a maze of ports that are drilled in this casting. And then the vacuum is transmitted through this slot here to this other hole here. Now this is one of the reasons that you don't want to use a gasket glue like RTV or Permatex on this, because this has to remain clear and open for the vacuum signal to be transmitted from the venturi into the vacuum operator. Now from here, from this hole, it's actually connected to this hole that you can see at the tip of the screwdriver right here, and this hole is actually also connected to the secondary. There's another hole right here at the very middle of the venturi. So the venturi is actually the restriction here. This is the primary one, this is the secondary one. Okay? So it's the sum of the vacuum signals at the two venturis that will determine whether or not the vacuum actuator opens. So this port here is connected to this port in the secondary venturi, and then the vacuum is transmitted through this slot to this port and then to your vacuum actuator. And that's how it works. So when the vacuum is only high in the primary, then it's going to suck air in through this point, and then when mechanically this opens a little bit, then the vacuum will increase in the secondary bore, and now that you have vacuum in both ports, then it will begin to pull a vacuum on the actuator and open the secondary all the way. So that's why it's critical that the mechanical linkage opens the secondary in order to allow vacuum to get in here to increase the total vacuum on here and cause the actuator to open the secondary all the way. Okay, so a couple more details about what can go wrong with vacuum operated secondaries on Aisan carburetors. So as I mentioned, it's this cam here and this little arm that's on the mechanical shaft for the secondary determines how much it opens initially. So you can adjust this by bending this tab upward to increase the opening, or bending it this way to decrease the opening. Now the other thing that can happen is the carburetor shaft, the secondary shaft, can stick. So the vacuum actuator is actually connected to a spring here. So this is actually kind of a spring-driven opening of this. And one of the things is if the vacuum operated secondary hasn't been working for a long time, the shaft can get gummy. So you want to make sure that it turns easily. So the way to do that is to open the primary all the way and then turn this knob to see if you can get the secondary to open, and as you can see that it opens very easily. So if it's stuck, it won't work either. And if it's stuck, what you have to do is you have to clean out the shaft. And what you don't want to do is you don't want to remove this butterfly valve to do that. So you want to soak this in carburetor cleaner and spray cleaner and work it until this opens and turns very easily. But as a last resort, you'd only as a last resort remove this brass butterfly valve, because the screws that hold it in here are staked, which means the ends of them are smashed so that you can't remove the screw anymore. So the only way to get them out is to grind or file off the ends of this. And then you have to replace the screw, and then you want to peen these back to stake them so that they can't fall out of the shaft. Okay? So that's it for vacuum operated secondaries on Aisan carburetors. Bye.